There is a cabinet in a farmhouse outside Strasburg, Pennsylvania that has not changed since 1953. Same shelf paper, same handwritten labels on the jars, same 4 or 5 ingredients the woman who lives there has been using on her face since she was in her 30s. She is 81 now. You would guess 65 on a bad day. That cabinet is not a museum piece. It is a working skincare routine. And almost everything in it was at some point between 1,955 and 1,980 quietly pushed out of the mainstream market, reclassified, or simply buried under the weight of products that cost more and did less. If you have been burning through serums and creams that promised you something and delivered nothing, and you are starting to wonder whether the real answers were always somewhere older and quieter than a Sephora shelf, stay with me. Subscribe if you want more of this, because we are just getting started. The methods I am sharing today are inspired by traditional practices of Old Order Amish communities in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and Holmes County, Ohio. These are communities that do not use synthetic cosmetics, do not follow beauty industry trends, and have not changed their approach to skin and body care in generations. What researchers and dermatologists are now confirming is not new to them. It was never lost. It was just inconvenient for someone else's business model. Let me start with a little history, because the history is the point. In 1938, the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act was passed. That was the first major federal attempt to regulate what went into beauty products. Before 1938, almost anything could be sold in a jar with a beautiful label and a hopeful promise. The law was a step forward, but it had a significant gap. Cosmetics did not have to prove they worked. They only had to prove they were not immediately dangerous. That gap has never fully closed. Then came the post-war boom. Between 1945 and 1960, the American cosmetics industry expanded at a rate the country had never seen. New emulsifiers, new synthetic preservatives, new petroleum-derived moisturizers. These were cheaper to manufacture than the animal fats, plant oils, and botanical extracts that had been the basis of skincare for a century. And cheaper to manufacture meant higher margins, and higher margins meant more advertising, and more advertising meant that by 1958, the average American woman had been trained to believe that a cream in a frosted glass jar from a department store counter was more sophisticated than anything her grandmother had used. What her grandmother had used was, in many cases, better. Here is the first thing that was effectively sidelined: beef tallow. If that word just made you wrinkle your nose, that reaction was engineered. Tallow is rendered beef fat. For most of human history, it was a primary skin moisturizer. Its fatty acid profile is remarkably close to human sebum, which is the skin's own natural oil, oleic acid, palmitic acid, stearic acid. Your skin recognizes these. It does not have to work to absorb them the way it works to absorb a silicone-based lotion. Dermatologists who have revisited tallow in peer-reviewed literature in recent years have noted that its lipid compatibility with skin is genuinely unusual among natural moisturizers. The Amish never stopped using it. It was never banned outright, but it was made culturally obsolete by the vegetable oil and petroleum lobbies that had very good reasons to replace it on the market. The second thing is raw apple cider vinegar as a toner. Not the filtered, pasteurized version. The raw, unfiltered kind with what is called the mother, the cloudy strands of natural enzymes and acetic bacteria at the bottom of the bottle. Amish women in Lancaster County have used diluted apple cider vinegar on their faces for generations, applied with a cloth after washing. The pH of healthy skin is slightly acidic, somewhere around 4.5 to 5.5. Most commercial toners in the 1970s and 1980s were alkaline, which disrupts that barrier and actually increases water loss from the skin. What apple cider vinegar does, diluted properly, is help restore that acid mantle. There is nothing exotic about this. Hippocrates documented the medicinal use of vinegar in 400 BC. It was practical knowledge that got crowded out. Third, lard-based lip balm, not the synthetic wax versions that coat without penetrating. The old formulations used rendered pork fat, sometimes with a little beeswax and dried herb. Lard has a high concentration of linoleic acid, which is one of the fatty acids the skin barrier depends on. The lip skin is thin and has no sebaceous glands of its own. It depends entirely on what you apply. Petroleum-based lip balms create a seal but do not feed the tissue. There is a real difference. Fourth is the practice of leaving the face unwashed in the morning. Not skipping hygiene, but understanding that skin that was well cleaned the night before and then left alone overnight has rebuilt its acid mantle, secreted its own oils, and does not need stripping again at 6 in the morning. In Amish households, a simple cool water rinse in the morning is common, not a second full cleanse. Dermatologists began formally revisiting this in the early 2000s under the concept of barrier preservation, but women in those farmhouses had been doing it for decades before the research caught up. Now, I want to be straight with you about something, because a channel that only tells you the good parts is a channel that is selling you something. None of these practices work quickly. That is not a small caveat. If you start using tallow or apple cider vinegar toner today, you are not going to look different in 2 weeks. The skin's natural renewal cycle is roughly 28 days, and for women over 50, it extends to 40 days or longer. You are looking at 6 to 8 weeks of consistent use before you will see a meaningful change in texture and moisture retention. And if you have reactive skin, rosacea, or any active inflammatory condition, the vinegar toner is not for you. The acidity that helps a healthy acid mantle can aggravate an already inflamed one. That is not a failure of the method. It is just not the right tool for every face. What these methods are designed for is the slow, long-term maintenance of skin that has been quietly depleted by decades of the wrong products. That is the demographic these communities have tested them on without knowing they were testing anything for a very long time. Fifth, oat-based face washing. Raw oats, ground fine, mixed with water into a paste. Oats contain compounds called avenanthramides, which have measurable anti-inflammatory properties. They also contain beta-glucan, which forms a moisture-retaining film on the skin surface. Colloidal oatmeal has been FDA approved as a skin protectant since 2003, which is a formality. Amish women were grinding oats for facial washing long before any regulatory body confirmed what they already knew from use. Sixth is the deliberate avoidance of fragrance in anything applied near the face, not for philosophical reasons, for practical ones. Fragrance, both synthetic and natural, is one of the most common triggers of contact dermatitis and chronic low-level skin inflammation. The North American Contact Dermatitis Group has identified fragrance mix as one of the most prevalent allergens in patch testing for decades. Old Order Amish cosmetic practice has no tradition of scented skincare because there was never a market incentive to add it. That absence turned out to be protective. Seventh is beeswax as a barrier agent. Real unrefined beeswax in a simple ointment base. Beeswax creates an occlusive layer that slows transepidermal water loss, which is the process by which moisture evaporates from your skin all day without you noticing. Transepidermal water loss increases significantly after menopause as estrogen levels drop and the skin barrier thins. Beeswax does not replace what estrogen was doing internally, but it physically compensates for some of that barrier loss at the surface level. Amish communities have maintained beehives as a household resource for generations, which made beeswax a free, available ingredient. Its skin benefits were incidental and persistent. Eighth is the practice of using whole, cold-pressed plant oils rather than fractionated ones. Fractionation strips out the heavier molecular components to create a lighter product. The problem is that some of those heavier components, like the fat-soluble vitamins and the less refined fatty acids, are the ones with the most biological activity. Amish households that press their own sunflower or flaxseed oil were not fractionating it. They were using the whole thing. Whole cold-pressed sunflower oil has measurably higher vitamin E content than refined versions. Vitamin E is a lipid-soluble antioxidant that protects cell membranes from oxidative damage. You lose something when you refine it out. Ninth, calendula, the dried flower, infused in oil, applied topically. Calendula officinalis has been used in wound healing and skincare across European herbal traditions for centuries. Modern research has confirmed its anti-inflammatory and wound healing properties primarily through flavonoids and triterpenoids in the plant. A 2013 study published in the Journal of Clinical Oncology found calendula cream superior to trolamine for preventing acute dermatitis in breast cancer patients undergoing radiation. That is a narrow finding, but it points towards something real. Amish herbalists in Holmes County still grow and dry calendula as a household staple. It never needed a patent because it never needed to be invented. 10th is the nighttime application of a thin layer of raw honey. Honey is hygroscopic, meaning it draws moisture from the environment into the skin. It also has natural hydrogen peroxide content at low levels, which gives it mild antimicrobial properties without stripping the microbiome the way a harsher antiseptic would. Manuka honey has gotten a lot of commercial attention in recent years, but plain, raw, unfiltered honey from a local hive does most of the same work at a fraction of the price. There is a woman in Lancaster County, 67 years old, a retired school teacher who grew up in an old order household before leaving the community in her 20s. She has 5 children. She has used a 2-ingredient nighttime routine for 40 years, raw honey and tallow applied in a thin layer and left overnight. She told me once that the thing that strikes her most when she looks at what her former students are spending on skincare now is not that the products are expensive. It is that the expensive products are solving problems that the products themselves created. She spends about $4 a month. 11th is internal. Bone broth consumed regularly. Amish households have traditionally used every part of an animal, and long-simmered bone broth has been a dietary staple, not a wellness trend. Bone broth is a source of dietary collagen peptides and glycine. The evidence on whether oral collagen peptides improve skin elasticity is genuinely mixed, but several randomized controlled trials published between 2014 and 2019 found statistically significant improvements in skin elasticity and hydration with regular dietary collagen peptide intake. What the Amish were doing for practical economy may have had cosmetic benefits they were never aware of. 12th is the simplest of all and the hardest for most women to actually do: consistent sleep in a dark room without artificial light exposure in the hours before bed. The skin's repair processes are regulated by circadian rhythm. Growth hormone secretion, cell turnover, inflammatory regulation, these peak during deep sleep between roughly 10 in the evening and 2 in the morning. The Amish sleep schedule, shaped by the absence of electric light and the demands of early farm work, produces naturally early bedtimes and long sleep windows. This is not a hack. It is a structural advantage they have by necessity. Modern sleep medicine has spent 30 years documenting what that advantage does for metabolic and skin health. Now, here is the part that should make you genuinely angry, not in a vague way, but in a specific documented way. In 1958, the Delaney Clause was added to the Food Additives Amendment, which prohibited carcinogens in food. Fine. But in 1960, the Color Additive Amendments gave the FDA authority to regulate cosmetic colorants without addressing the broader category of cosmetic ingredients. The synthetic preservative and fragrance industries had already established lobbying structures. By the 1970s, the Cosmetic, Toiletry, and Fragrance Association, now called the Personal Care Products Council, was actively influencing what required safety testing and what did not. In 1997, the European Union began phasing out a list of cosmetic ingredients that remained legal in the United States. By 2023, the EU had restricted or banned over 1,300 substances from cosmetics. The United States had banned or restricted 11. That number is not a conspiracy theory, it is public record. The industry did not bury these traditional ingredients through some dramatic act. It made them unfashionable. It made them seem primitive. It flooded the market with alternatives that were cheaper to produce and more profitable to market. And it did it incrementally, quietly over decades, while the women who kept using tallow and honey and oats in their farmhouses just kept having good skin and not talking about it because nobody was asking. Drop your state in the comments and tell me what you spend on anti-aging products every month. I am genuinely curious, and I think you might be surprised when you see what other women answer. And if your grandmother used something her mother used before her, I want to hear about it. Those stories are not nostalgia. They are data. If you are the kind of woman who believes that real knowledge has been quietly pushed aside to protect someone else's profit, you already know what to do. Next time, the Amish hair ritual the FDA tried to classify as drug grade in 1978, and the reason they failed is a story you need to hear.